more shocked than anything. You know what I'm saying? But I wasn't more shocked of him dying. I was more shocked at him.
Welcome to the Undercurrent. I'm Lauren Windsor. We are here at the National Press Club for the Lessons of Watergate conference, and we are with Daniel Ellsberg, the co-author of the Pentagon Papers and also the whistleblower credited with ending the Vietnam War. He is also a co-plaintiff in the NDAA case headed up by Hedges v. Obama. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Can you give us any news on the progress of the case?
Well, it's the Circuit Court has heard arguments now on the constitutionality of this provision. I think it's 1021 of the NDAA.
Which allows for the indefinite detention of American citizens without warrant or trial.
Without warrant or trial on suspicion of giving substantial support, whatever that is, undefined, to an associated group with a terrorist group, and again, that's undefined. So it's pretty subjective, pretty much open to the Defense Department and to put people under martial detention, Defense Department detention, like Bradley Manning, even if you're a civilian. But in this case, without charges, he's facing a court-martial, but this could be without charges for indefinite detention. So it's as strong an expression of absolute governmental power as you could have. It's a violation, very clearly, of the several amendments of the Constitution. Now, Catherine Forrest, a district judge, did correctly hold this facially unconstitutional, meaning under all circumstances, it's chilling of free speech and can't be accepted. The Circuit Court has now heard argument on that question. They haven't decided. I'm afraid they probably will decide to overrule Judge Forrest, and then it will go to the Supreme Court. Again, we can't be absolutely sure, but probably the Supreme Court will overrule her injunction, and this very unconstitutional law will become law.
Can you speak to the Obama administration's continued abrogation of civil liberties outlined within the Constitution?
Well, the Obama administration, very simply, on the level of both intervention and on homeland security, so-called matters of civil liberties, is essentially a fourth term of now of George W. Bush.
I'm thinking specifically of Rand Paul's filibuster last week. Could you speak to Rand Paul's filibuster last week over the use of drones?
I have many disagreements with Rand Paul on his politics, especially on domestic politics, but I thought he acted not only correctly but admirably in taking the initiative.
Courageously.
What?
Courageously.
Courageously. Well, courageous in the sense that to stand out from the crowd here and to appear to be charged with being ridiculous or self-serving. These are charges that don't put you in jail, but they do lose you the influence and respect. And in that sense, it takes courage and boldness to do it. Very few senators or representatives have shown the willingness to do that. So I admire very much what he did, and he did it on exactly the right principle, that this was overreaching by the president and that it endangered all Americans and it overrode the Constitution.
Everyone wants to concentrate on the actual targeting, like the killing of American citizens. But what about the surveillance that I find blatantly unconstitutional?
Well, that's a separate issue.
It is a separate issue,
very
but we're
related.
using drones against the American people on American soil for surveillance purposes.
Yeah.
And people aren't talking about this. They're talking about the targeted killing, which seems hyperbolic and seems absurd, but it's very much a reality that we are being watched and surveyed by our government.
The surveillance is a fact, of course, and not even primarily by drones now. The electronic surveillance is just pervasive, it's ubiquitous, and it's unconstitutional, and should be unconstitutional, and it's being allowed. Our present president actually, by supporting the FISA Amendments Act, actually meaning that you couldn't have civil suits against communications companies that were doing this, lent himself to the supposed legality of this process. So that's quite outrageous, and of course drones simply add to that surveillance. Now I think, frankly, it's naive to think that drones will indefinitely be used in this country only for surveillance. We're so used now to using them in other countries with which we're not at war for armed drones. I think there's every reason, it's more likely than not, that drones will eventually be armed and used for things like border surveillance and other matters. I don't think that's an unreasonable expectation at all.
Why is it that our president, who is a constitutional lawyer, hasn't faced more heat for these abrogations of our civil liberties?
First of all, I have to conclude that as a constitutional lawyer, he's of the same ilk as Professor John Yoo, Y-O-O, of Berkeley, who's a tenured professor of constitutional law at Berkeley, who clearly and explicitly has stated that the president is beyond any law, any restraint. And I have seen no indication that Obama disagrees with him. So the fact that he's a constitutional lawyer gives us no assurance that he approves of the Constitution as it is actually written. And second, because he does face a Democratic Senate at this point, and he's a Democratic president, he knows he can get away with this with little criticism from his partisans, from the Democrats. I think probably there would be much more criticism, at least, of, let's say, McCain or a Republican, Romney, was carrying out the same acts. That isn't to say that the president wouldn't get away with it. The criticism might or might not be very effective, but he would get more criticism. I think all presidents have been anxious to carry out leak prosecutions, but we're afraid too much of criticism from the French and the press and the public. And I think that Obama, in contrast to George W. Bush, finds that he can get away with it. So that's to the not so much criticism of him as of the media and the Congress who are letting him do this.
You said earlier within the panel that the Obama administration's participation or decision to participate in the Libya intervention was an impeachable offense. Can you articulate why you think that Obama should be impeached for Libya?
First of all, for political reasons, impeachment being largely a political matter, very hard to impeach a president whose majority party controls the Congress very much. You're almost never going to get that. And but in terms of, so practically speaking, the Senate would not impeach him, and he can get away with it. But in terms of violating Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which says that Congress alone does not share the power to declare war, it alone has the power to declare war. It's the War Powers Act is a very watered-down version of Article 1, Section 8 that gives the president, unfortunately, some 90 days in which to carry out operations. But even that has been pretty much ignored by this president, unlike even George H.W. Bush in the Gulf War or George W. Bush. He didn't even go through the motions of consulting with Congress. So he's asserted monarchical powers that that the founders of our Constitution meant in the Constitution to revoke. I think it's very clearly a high crime and misdemeanor to violate the Constitution. His oath is to protect and defend the Constitution. He's clearly violated that oath, as did George W. Bush.
And it makes me wonder if I'm under some sort of spiritual matrix with the truth pulled over my eyes with the evil forces that compromise my state of mind. Have I been hypnotized to believe in lies?